Hello ladies and gentlemen, Yapesy here. We are back with some more Hearthstone Arena action, and today we're going to play Druid. Druid's an interesting class, very popular these days in Constructed. A little bit more difficult to pull off in arenas, just due to the quality of cards that you need to draft to be successful. And before I begin the draft, current update on my stats, which you can always check in the links in the description. I'm at 74.5% win rate across 2,180 arena games. And for Druid in particular, I'm at 70.83% win rate, a bit below my average across 144 games. So not that many Druid games compared to some classes. Alright, so we're going to go through the full draft process here, talk about each card, but as always, let me know in the comments if you prefer this method with more detail and explanation, or you like the shorter draft process that just talks about the individual picks. So first up we have a rare pick. It's debatable which of these is the worst, but I would probably lean toward Ancient Mage being the weakest. Typically you don't need spell damage that much, although Druid is one class that can make good use of it. The main problem with this card is its attack is really low for the mana cost. Protector is also fairly weak. Basically, if she was a 3/2 minion with the same battle cry, she'd be a lot stronger. But the fact of the matter is you don't really need to give minions taunt very frequently, especially in arenas. This is more of a constructed card. And therefore, most of the time you're just playing this as a 2/3 minion for 2, and the battle cries are relevant. That's pretty weak. On the other hand, Juggler is great, so we're going to go Juggler. He's a really good 2-drop. Sometimes you can keep him around and make really good use out of his ability. For Druids, it's less important because we tend to not have that many minions, but it's still a card that will basically get focused by the opponent. So you always get 1-for-1 with Juggler. Alright, some bad cards and a decent one. Corehound is probably the weakest of these. The main problem is its health for its mana cost. 5 health for 7 mana is really low. It's more of a finishing card, but it's tough to actually finish since it doesn't have stealth or anything, so it can die really easily before you get to attack. Lord of the Arena suffers from the same issue, just slightly less so than the Corehound, but still 5 health for 6 mana in this case instead of 7. Still very low, and the taunt usually doesn't justify it. That said, he is better than the Booty Bay Bodyguard, which has the same sort of stats. Booty Bay Bodyguard's 5/4 taunt for 5. And it turns out that 5 health minions are much more robust than 4 health minions in Hearthstone, just due to the way, the sources of damage that exist that are common. Basically, a 5 health minion has much more survival than a 4. Anyway, we're going to go Venture Co. It's a pretty good 5-drop. And for Druids that won't summon a lot of minions, usually, you don't have to worry too much about its downside spell text. But usually this card gets 2-for-1. Okay. Weakest of these is debatable, but I'd probably lean towards Soul of the Forest. It's a cute card, it's kind of a fun card, but it's not a card that really gives you much advantage. You already need to have advantage, or at least be equivalent with quite a bit on the board to take advantage of this. What that generally means is you have to have 2 minions or more out when you cast Soul of the Forest for it to be at any reasonable value. 2 minions will of course give you 2 2/2s, or 4/4 in total for 4 mana, which is about what you'd expect. If you have 3 or more minions, then it's pretty strong, though, in terms of potential damage to mana cost. Magi is okay, but a little subpar. The spell damage, again, is pretty irrelevant, so it's typically you're just playing this as a 4/4 for 4. This is fine to draft if you really need spell damage, or you just don't have anything else to pick and you need a decent stat minion. But I'm going to go Worgen here. It's a really good 1-drop, probably one of the best neutrals. Because he has stealth, he can often trade up for a 2-drop minion and get you early game board advantage. Okay, Soul of the Forest again. Brewmaster is a solid 2-drop. This is the cheaper of the 2 Brewmasters, the Youthful over the Ancient. And 3/2 stats are really solid, and if you need the Brewmaster Battlecry to return a minion, it's a great form of that. Otherwise, you'll typically just draft him as a 2-drop, and sometimes you get cool stuff out of him. However, in this case, Power of the Wild is the clear winner. It's one of the best 2-drops. It is a class card, but it's a really strong, because you get a 3/2 if you want it for 2, very standard. Or you can even play this as a mid to late game card as a buff, giving all your minions +1/+1. So again, kind of like the Soul of Force we're talking. If you have at least 2 minions out, the stat to mana ratio on this is really good, and beyond that, it's even better. So this is almost a finisher card in many cases. It acts as a surprise card, basically. It's really good. Okay. So I would actually argue that Mark of Nature is the weakest of these, in arenas anyway. The main problem with this buff, which you see a lot in other buffs as well, is that when you buff a creature, a minion, you need to buff the attack and the health of it. And the reason for that is simply that you're trying to allow a minion to kill something that it otherwise would not be able to do while staying alive. Sometimes you can do that by buffing just the health and not the attack, but more often than not, you want to buff both. So Blessing of Kings does that, for example. Mark of the Wild, another Druid card, does that. But Mark of Nature here, you have to choose attack or health. And typically that means you are only allowing your minion to make a trade that it otherwise would not be able to do, but it's still a 2-for-1 loss for you. You trade your minion plus this card for the minion of the opponents. So it's just not that great. And the other way to think of it is this is 4 stats for 3 mana, whereas Mark of the Wild is +2/+2 for 2 mana, so it's actually a better ratio than this card. Naturalize, also one I don't like very much in arenas. People will play this in Constructed a fair bit, and that's mostly because Druid Constructed decks play a very slow control style, where you need to use Naturalize to remove extremely huge legendary threats that you can't otherwise deal with, namely Ragnaros, Sylvanas, stuff like that. But in arenas, the fact of the matter is you don't see those cards very often. People just don't get lucky enough to draft them very much. And even if they do, you won't face that opponent very often. So what that means is, in arenas, Naturalize is invariably massive card disadvantage for you. You trade this card for their card, and then they draw 2 more on top of it. So they get a 2-card advantage, even if you destroy something very useful. And that's tough to do. So I usually avoid this card as well. And in this case, Wrath is great. One of the best nukes, extremely versatile. It's tough to have too many of these in your draft, really. They're just really good cards. Okay. All 3 of these are excellent. So in no particular order, we got Power of the Wild again. Shattered Sun Cleric is still great even after her nerf to her health. She's still very strong. 3-drop. And Druid of the Claw, one of the best Druid minions. Because of its versatility, it's got good stats for its mana cost. You get to choose, the stronger 4/6 taunt or the charge version, all that good stuff. So, now to decide which to pick, actually. Power of the Wild is out. It's between these 2 for sure. And that's just because I already have 1 Power of the Wild and a Wrath and a Juggler. I think Druid of the Claw is slightly better than Shattered Sun Cleric, so I'm going to lean toward it. Okay. So Guardian's probably the weakest of these. With Divine Shield, it typically, you can think of it as having at least 4 health. It requires 4 damage to kill. And if it gets to engage in combat twice, it's kind of a 6/4 minion for 4, which is pretty good. So it's not bad. But I wouldn't pick it over a lot of better cards. Infiltrator we saw, and then Cult Master here. Not quite as good as on a Druid deck as other decks, but I still like to draft the first Cult Master I see if I can afford it. Usually you'll get 1 card advantage by playing this at the right time. Okay, some more good cards. Cult Master again. Ironbark Protector is a really good late game card. It's just very difficult for the opponent to deal with unless they have removal spells. However, as much as I hate to skip this, Swipe is the king here. Kind of an auto-pick card for Druid arenas. You should basically pick every swipe you get. It's really efficient In terms of removal, it allows you a lot of opportunities to do board clears, even if without spell damage. Because even though 1 damage to all other enemies is a little low, you can effectively think of it as potential 2 damage because your hero power allows you to do an extra damage, and along with other miscellaneous damage. It's really, really efficient. All right. A couple terrible cards. Moonfire is awful. You should never draft it. It just simply doesn't do enough to warrant a card in your deck. 1 damage for 1 card, not good. Warden also is very weak. Its attack is far too low. So we're going to go Magi here. This is one of those situations where I talked about Magi before. I don't choose it over other cards if I can help it, but it's an average stat card, and that's sometimes just what we're going for. And it's possible we'll use it with Swipe and Wrath. Okay. Ancient Mage again. Demolishers, okay, but what I've found quite often with Demolisher is that if you play this on 3, you're going to have a bad time. That is that it doesn't invariably do much on its own without being around for a long time and protecting it. And that can be very difficult to do depending on your class. So your best bet for Demolisher is to be a weapon class. Something that can protect it immediately the turn that you play it or the following turn with charge or weapons. So warriors, rogues, stuff like that. More often than not, though, if you can't protect it, it doesn't actually hit the target you want, even if it survives a turn, and will just die for pretty much free. So I'm going to go Pyromancer here. It's a really good 2-drop. Also a very popular card in Constructed, but in Arenas it also has potential for really cool combos. You just have to think outside the box a bit, so to speak, about when to cast spells with this, but it can be really powerful. I only have 2 spells now, but I might get more. But it's still fine. Okay. Here we have an epic pick, some decent cards. I would say Molten Giant for Druid is the weakest. This card, you really need to reliably take damage on your hero as part of your normal gameplay. So Warlocks that life tap, Warriors, Rogues that take a lot of damage from weapon attacks, they can play Molten Giants pretty reliably, but other classes have a much more difficult time because they won't ideally take damage that much. Faceless Manipulator's okay. This is not as powerful in Arenas as it is in Constructed for the same reason that Naturalize is not good. The fact of the matter is you want to Faceless something really powerful. And in Arenas you don't face minions that are that strong all that often. So if you reliably saw Ragnaros or a good legendary, you could copy that. But in Arenas, you typically don't see those cards. Best case, you see something like a Venture Co., maybe a Boulderfist Ogre at the high end, Stormwind Champion, maybe. So those are good copy targets. But more often than not, you're sitting there with this card in your hand at turn 5 or well past it, waiting for the opportunity. And so it's a dead card for quite a while. Anyway, so we're going to go Ancient of War. It's a really good epic drop. Most, I would say 9.9 times out of 10, you'll play this as a 5/10, because playing as a 10/5 is quite weak for 7. That goes to the 5 health issue for 7 mana that we talked about before. But a 5/10 taunt is really strong, so we're going to go with him. Kind of an auto-pick card, unless you have an Ancient of Lore up against it. Alright, a couple weak cards here. Wild Growth, I'm not a fan of. I think this card is not worth the benefit, because you're basically spending a card to get ahead 1 turn in mana, but you're spending 2 mana in the process on the turn before. So you're losing board tempo to try to regain that tempo by getting 1 extra mana crystal. And that's best case scenario if you draw it early. If you draw it late game, you already have 9 or 10 mana. It's irrelevant. You're just cycling it out to draw another card. We have Mark of Nature again, and then Argent Squire is okay. Typically you need to have buffs with this card, although as a hero that can do 1 damage with their hero power, Druid, Mage, Rogue, this card is a little bit stronger than it could be, because even if you don't have something to do on 2, you can use this to attack into something plus your hero power and kill a 3/2 minion. So I think I'll lean towards Squire over Mark of Nature. Yeah. Alright, Magma Rager's awful. Should never draft it. The stats are far too weak. Basically 1 mana, or 1 health is just too low. Here we got both Brewmasters pairing off. So the Ancient version is quite a bit weaker than the Youthful, and that's mostly due to the disparity in stats. 4 health is very low. It dies to a lot of 3 mana minions that have 4 attack. Whereas if he was 4/5, he would survive a lot better. So typically if you just want Brewmasters, unless you desperately need a 4-cost minion, you should go with the Youthful. It's just better stats, and I'm going to do that here. Okay. Here's Mark of the Wild I mentioned before. It's much better buff than the other one we saw, Mark of Nature. But I still would not prefer it over better cards. Because the way to think of this is in terms of stats, in terms of power, this is a 2/2 for 2, which is pretty weak. Sometimes it allows you to make trades that you otherwise wouldn't be able to do, and that's awesome. But usually I'll pick a better card over it if I can, such as Shattered Sun or Stormwind Champion. So the question is, do I go for Shattered Sun for the early game, or do I go Stormwind for the late game? I think I need a 3 pretty badly, since I don't have any, so I'm going to go Shattered. It's a good thing I did that. Grave Argent Squire again. Bloodcell Raider is not very good unless you have a lot of weapons. Maybe a rogue, maybe a warrior. No good for us. And we're going to go Ironbark Protector for sure. Really good late game. We could use some more. Okay. Rare pick here. Questing is the weakest of these for Druid in particular. You need a lot of fast cards to be able to play Questing without it dying easily the turn you play it. Otherwise it has to be protected. So again, it comes down to spells or weapons or charge minions that can keep it alive. Knife Juggler again, it's really solid. Nourish is a good way to get card draw in the mid to late game. You just have to find the opportunity to play it. So the question is, do I need the 2-drop, or can I go with Nourish for the card advantage? I have 3 2-drops already, plus a Worgen and a Squire, so I think I can go Nourish here. Okay. These are fairly weak. We saw Lord of the Arena before. Raid Leader is very subpar. The main problem with it is its spell text does not justify its mana cost and stats. So if you have 2 other minions out when you play this, that's the best case scenario where the total attack given, the stats given, average out to a 3/3 for 3. Because it's giving 2 extra stats on top of the 2/2 that it was. So that's a really difficult way to think about this card, and it makes it very difficult to play it properly. So I think I'll go Wolf Rider here as basically a removal card. It's 3 damage for 3 mana, so I'll treat this kind of as a more expensive Wrath, basically. And just probably play it as removal. Okay. Deckhand is terrible, unless you're a rogue pretty much, that always has weapons. Shattered Sun again. Darkscale Healer is pretty good. 4/5 for 5 is a little bit below average, but the healing is quite solid. You can always heal your hero for 2 pretty much, and often minions as well. But we gotta go Shattered Sun. We need the 3s, we don't really need the 5 right now, and she's just better than the healer. Alright, Raid Leader again. Direwolf Alpha is okay, but somewhat weaker in Druid decks because you're not going to have that many small minions. And by himself as a 2-drop, he's not very good. He's a support card. So I think I'll go Guardian over the Direwolf here. Rare pick. Cold Light Seer is awful. You can't rely on Murlocs, so don't grab that guy ever. Questing we saw already, so we're going to go Emperor Cobra. It's a fine 3-drop. It's basically, the way I think about this card is just a 1-for-1. You don't really care about the stats unless the opponent has Divine Shield. This card's going to get a 1-for-1 trade, pretty much. So that's fine. That's good enough. Around 3. and if you can play it mid to late game up against some really strong minions, it can often trade up really favorably. Okay, well, this is fascinating. Wild Growth again. Frostwolf Grunt, not a very good card at all. Its stats are very weak, and the taunt doesn't justify the stat loss. So here I actually would go Innervate. Typically I don't like Innervate, same with Wild Growth, but Innervate's much better in arenas because it's tough to rely on having the right curve and card strength to use this. So basically I'm going to draft this in hopes that if I get it early game, I can also keep a high cost minion. I don't have very good ones around the 4s or 5s though. Well, 5s I do, 4s not so much. But the idea will be to use this to get a strong minion out earlier than I would be able to. Wow. All around bad cards. Voodoo Doctor's the weakest. Battlecry is almost irrelevant if you play it on 1. Tartan Warrior's stats are basically that of a 2-drop minion, but it costs 3. So we're going to go Ironbeak Owl. Its stats are also bad, but it is a silence. So typically I'll probably play this just as a silence card with the minion that's left over being almost irrelevant. Okay, Ghoul is okay if you play it on 3 when you trade your 2 for their 2. And it's a 4/3. But if you can't do that, it's not so good. So do I get the 3 or the 5? I think the 5 probably. For 3s I have 1, 2, 3.5. For 5s I have 1, 2. Yeah, I need the 5s in the late game. Alright, Bomber's a good 2-drop. Sometimes you can get an extra card, get a 2-for-1 with this guy if the opponent plays something weak early. Doesn't happen often, but sometimes. And then Dark Iron Dwarf's a really good 4-drop. So I think I go for the 4s because I don't have that many 4-drop minions. Alright, here we've seen all of these, so I'm going to go Ironbark number 2 for the late game. I don't have any 6s, so my late game is basically a couple 5s and these 2. So could use a bit more. Rare pick here. Murloc, ignore both of those, they're terrible, so we're going to go Pyro number 2. He's a fine 2-drop. Wish I had more spells, but I have a few. Jeez, another Pyro. Pine Size is a little bit subpar. Her stats are fairly weak, is the main problem. So she can't trade up for a 3-drop, which is what you usually want your 2-drop to be able to do. 3 attack allows it to trade up. Sometimes this card can allow you to summon things early, though, which is great. And then Abomination is sort of a board clear, pseudo board clear. So I think I might go Abomination here, because I only have 1 swipe right now, and I'm pretty much done with the draft. So we'll lean on that a bit. An epic choice here. World Eater is the weakest. Again, it relies on Murlocs, which you're not going to really draft, so usually you would pick this as an epic choice only when the other cards are terrible, and you just need a 3/3 for 3. That's about it. Blood Knight's pretty good. 3/3 for 3, and if you can get Divine Shield, he's really strong. But Sea Giant is the winner. It's the best giant in arenas. Typically, you'll play this for 7 or less mana, as long as there are a few minions out, and that's really solid. And I still think I can afford more late game. Alright, 2 picks left. Healing Touch is an interesting card, but usually it's not needed in arenas. You kind of want to pick this card when you're sort of in a situation where you're really losing to a burn deck, but that doesn't happen much in arenas because people can't draft things that efficiently. So usually I'll skip this unless I desperately need the 3 mana cost. Nightblade's no good, stats are weak, you don't need the Battlecry against the opponent's hero, so I think I'll go Healer. Yeah. Oh, and a legendary pick, last choice. Some really good cards here, actually. All these are quite solid. Hogger's probably the weakest. It's debatable, but probably the weakest. He's 6/6 for 6 when you play him. So that's the good news, right? You just play him. He's a 6/6 for 6 in total. Ideally, you're going to want to play him when you can protect him. So this goes back to having heavy spell deck, having weapons, having charge minions, stuff like that, that can keep the Hogger portion of the spawn alive. And then multiple turns afterward, if he's alive, he gets really strong. Suddenly you're up to 8/8 total stats, and then 10/10 and 12/12 and so on. But that can be tough to do. Black Knight can be pretty good. It's very common and constructed because of all the big taunts. It's more difficult to use it in Arena, but most people will play a taunt at some point in arenas. The problem is, when that point comes, it may be really late in the game, and this may be a dead card in your hand for a long time because you're waiting for that taunt. And if they don't play a taunt, you can't just play this 4/5 for 6. It's really bad. So, we're going to go Ragnaros for sure. Ragnaros, I think, is the best legendary in arenas, pretty much without question. It's a game-winning card. So if you can draft this ever, just do it. The main thing is that if you play it against an empty board, you get 8 damage immediately, and then you have an 8/8 minion that you have to deal with. But more often than not, you play it against something on the board. If it kills something on the board, it's a 2-for-1 automatically. It kills something, and then they have to spend in their card to kill it. It's really powerful. So we'll go with that. Alright, so our curve is very strange here. You can see it almost goes from low to high. The saving grace, I guess, is that our late game doesn't have any 6s, which is usually not good, but what that basically means is our late game, while it appears like we have a lot, we don't actually have as much as you normally would. Typically, this curve would sort of cap out around 3-4, going down on either side. So the total number of 5s, 6, and 7s would probably be about the same as what we have now. Our early game is okay. Some strong cards in the 2s. 3s are pretty good. 4s are okay. Again, some strong cards, Swipe and Dark Iron, with some weak ones. Magic Guardian. Our 5s are really good, and our late game is exceptionally strong. Our late game is incredible. So, that's kind of how Druid goes. Even constructed, you pretty much play it as a slow late game deck. The problem with this draft mainly is the lack of swipes. We have 1, and that's not very many. We don't have any Starfalls either. So as we get into game 1, really the ultimate goal is to try to get some early game going right away so we can just survive until we get to late game cards, and then we should be doing pretty well. Okay, so I think I'll drop Cult Master here. I'll keep this 4. Do I want to keep Wrath? Probably should. Could be worse. That's not very good. So I guess Cult Master was better.
My greetings.
So you gonna play Northshire on 1? A lot of priests like to do that. Oh, Mind Vision. Yikes. So hopefully you didn't get an Ironbark Protector. Ideally you got the coin. That can happen and it would be awesome. Oh, we got an Innervate. So we have 3 extra mana. We can do a Magi now. And that's pretty good, actually. 4/4 against a priest is really strong. Next turn we can Wrath with a spell damage out. And that means if he plays a 3/2 minion, we can kill it for free, basically. Draw a card back. So there's a lot of strength against a priest for playing a 4/4 minion on turn 1. Although, actually, if he played a 3/2 minion, I'd probably just kill it with this and not waste the card. I mean, it wouldn't be a wasted card. I'd draw back, but, you know how it goes. I could play a 2-drop instead. He didn't do anything, so that's good. So I will play this as a 3/2. So I don't have anything for 3 next turn. So, Wrath or Hero Power, probably. Dat Grizzly. Well, that's cute. So I could Pyro, Wrath that for 2, and then the Pyro would trigger and kill that. But, again, since I can kill it with his minion, I should probably just do that. Playing the Pyro with the Wrath like that. Oh, wait, what am I saying? I wouldn't have enough mana for that play anyway, so it doesn't matter. Oh, he took my own Wrath. And he killed that for free. That sucks. Shield Bearer. That's a terrible card. Alright, well, I can't do a whole lot here, so I will just hit him for 1 extra. Oh, I screwed that up. I didn't think of the math properly. I should have hit the 4 health thing with a 3 and my hero power, and then I could have done 2 extra damage to his face. So if I lose by 2, I'll be very sad. Do I swipe that? If I swipe it, this will trigger and both these will go down to 1. That'll die. Alternatively, I Wrath and Hero Power.
I wonder.
Yeah, I think I should Wrath instead. I'd rather have a swipe around. Swipe would have taken the same amount of mana that I used there for. And since it can target enemy heroes, it's kind of a potential finisher card. Whereas Wrath just targets the players. Right, this is a great in-game hand. So I cannot cast another spell here or my dudes die. So I should probably Cult Master and double trade.
I wonder.
It's risky though. And I guess the plan would be to Venture Co. Hero Power next turn.
What to do?
Now I'll trade this in case I draw something better.
Time waits for no one.
Yeah. I'll return this. Save my Cult Master, maybe, for a round. This is only worse if the difference between 3 attack and 4 attack matters, which I doubt. Looks like I was right. So I probably swipe this here. Kills that, that goes down to 3, and then that kills it. So swipe 2 for 1, and then Emperor Cobra. This would be a good time for him to mind control one of these. Or not mind control, what's it called? 4 mana one, I forget.
time for a little blood.
Looks like it's time for Rag. So I'll kill this with the Cobra and attack him. He cannot mind control next turn, so Rag gets 2 rounds pretty much. So Rag either does 8 to him or kills that. Alright, that's probably for the best, actually. So we'll see Shadow or Death if he has it. Slot Steal. It's a risky play.
Put this apple on your head.
All right. I could Cult Master when I trade, but then I have no easy way to protect it from that. So I think I will Ancient of War, protect Rag a bit, and then here. Okay. Well, he's at lethal. Silence on Rag is pretty much irrelevant, since now he's just an 8/8 that can attack.
You love my new recipe.
What we do.
He loses. Well, as expected, our end game, once we got to it, just destroyed.